live to talk about the last days of Julian Assange in the Ecuador Embassy in London. Welcome, everybody, to a Friday live stream. A sad live stream, I would say. A live stream that's a bit depressing, given the news about the state of Assange, Julian Assange, and what's about to happen, according to a WikiLeaks announcement. I have with me in Moscow the host of RT's Crosstalk, the one, the only, Mr. Peter Lavelle. How are you doing, Peter?
A bit somber, to be honest with you. We've been talking about this for so many podcasts, and we've had the expert legal advice of Alexander Makiris, and it's a very bad day for journalism. And there have been a lot of really bad days for journalism lately.
Yes, I echo.
And in London, the Oracle of London, where Julian Assange is right now as well, Mr. Alexander Makiris.
Indeed, and I echo all the things that Peter said, and I would add a degree of shame also, because of course this has happened in Britain, which is my country, and I think the British authorities have handled this whole business of Assange in a terrible way. I can remember how in past times the British stood firmly in defense of people who were being politically persecuted. They supported journalism. They did all of these things. And on this occasion, they have sided with the power against the truth. And that's what's happened.
All right. If you guys can hear me okay, let me know in the chat. I think everyone is hearing me okay. Moon Dragon. Hi, Duran. You're amazing. Thank you. Thank you, Valias, for your super chat, your $20 super chat. We really appreciate it. Sergey, hello from Murmansk. Hello to Moskva. Hello, Sergey. Hello, Stuart from Scotland. Jonathan, it's sickening in many ways. Yes, it is. Clayed, check out WikiLeaks page and see who their partners are. With such friends, you don't need enemies. Sanya, hi, Duran. This is very sad. Yes, let's, Peter, this was your idea to get this live stream together. I think we all woke up to the news that it looks like Assange will be given up to the UK authorities. It looks like Ecuador President Moreno, I believe is his name, has struck some sort of deal with the UK government. Peter, why don't you kick off this live stream as to what's going on?
Well, we've been predicting this for a while. Actually, I'd like to correct myself or admit a mistake. I thought that this would have happened before the Mueller report was going to be released, but it's happening afterwards in rapid succession. One of the things that I really ponder is just it's not just the terrible fate of Julian Assange, which I think is, as Alexander Makiris said, this is just a shame. I mean, this is an abomination of what's happening here. And the deal that's being made with the Ecuadorian government and the British government is basically to assign Julian Assange to oblivion, because once the Americans get their hands on him, there will be most likely a secret trial. Evidence will be made against Julian Assange that his lawyer cannot see, that he himself cannot see. And if there is a jury, the jury won't be allowed to see it. It will be up to a judge, one judge. And that is called the kangaroo court. We will never know what happened. And this is the irony of ironies, is that WikiLeaks was telling us what was happening in the world, what was happening behind closed doors, what was happening behind the cloak of these intelligence agencies. So this is, and what I want to know is if Julian Assange and WikiLeaks are on trial here, then why isn't the Washington Post? Why isn't the New York Times? Why isn't the Guardian? Because they also are publishers, like WikiLeaks is a publisher. It didn't publish its own material. So the glaring double standard here could not be more obvious and more shameful. And where are journalists? Where are journalists speaking out? No, they're all stenographers for power. This is a grave, grave hour. And Julian Assange represents what's happened to our society, where the public square can only be used by those that are vetted to use it. It's shameful, absolutely shameful. Because at the end of the day, it may sound trite, then you're next. And you'll have a secret trial where you will never see the evidence and we'll never know what happened to you. That's why you have to speak up and speak up loud. And that's why we're doing this today.
Well, I echo all of that, and I would also add, by the way, that of course what has happened in Britain has been an extraordinary story in legal terms. It all began with a court case in Sweden, except of course it wasn't actually a court case. It was
Never
an
indicted.
inquiry.
Yeah,
he was
never
never indicted for
indicted.
anything. He was never indicted. The Swedes issued a European arrest warrant because they wanted to question him, or so they said, over certain certain rape allegations. And it's important to stress those were only allegations. He had already answered those questions that they wanted to put to him. They wanted, however, to put them to him all over again. He made himself available in England to be questioned in that way. And we now know that neither the British authorities nor the Swedish authorities were prepared to let him be questioned in England. They insisted on his return to Sweden in circumstances which made it look, frankly, that if he went to Sweden, he would be very quickly sent off to the United States. So after a series of legal decisions, which I personally find very remarkable and very extraordinary, and I'm very unhappy about how those legal decisions were made, he jumped bail, which I don't find at all surprising, went to the Ecuadorian Embassy, was granted asylum there, and please note there has never been any real dispute about the fact that that grant of asylum was an appropriate grant of asylum. The British prevented him from traveling to Ecuador, which had granted him asylum, which is contrary to international law because it interferes with the movement of a refugee to the country which has granted him asylum. The United Nations authorities pointed this out. That continued to be ignored. Eventually, the Swedes did interview him in the Ecuadorian embassy, which they'd always said they wouldn't do. After that, they dropped the case. We know his account of what he said to them because his statement has appeared on the internet. And to my mind, it comprehensively answers the allegations. So there are no grounds any longer for treating those allegations of rape as being in any way true, and yet notwithstanding the collapse of the case against him, which was the original pretext of all these, of the action that was taken against him in Britain, the arrest warrants against him have never been lifted. The British continue to obstruct his traveling to Ecuador. And now we see that this Ecuadorian president, who has gone completely against the political basis upon which he has elected, has now done what looks like a very sordid deal to hand him over to the British, who will in turn, one must assume, hand him over to the United States. So Chelsea Manning is now...
Thank you for mentioning this. Good, yeah.
Chelsea Manning is now disappearing, apparently indefinitely, into a prison where she has been previously mistreated because she was a witness for the truth, and it looks as if Julian Assange is going to follow her. I think this is not just a bad day for journalism, though it obviously it is. It is a bad day for democracy, the rule of law, and any belief in the truth.
You know, the compound, the absurdity of all of this here is that the authorities are doing this in broad daylight. I mean, they're not. This is not cloak and dagger. This is really open, and this is such a travesty of justice and what is objectively true. And they do it in broad daylight. And there is the reaction is, I mean, for the way they're reporting it is that this is just a almost like an entertainment event. Okay, watching a man being deprived of his liberty, and it's spectacle. It's spectacle. They don't say anything that we've already said on this podcast. It's
No.
spectacle for spectacle's sake, okay? And I'm glad you brought up Chelsea Manning. What they want to do, they want to shake both of these individuals down. This is a shakedown. This is what mafias do, okay? They want the names. They want the names and the names of everything that was leaked. What they want to do is they want to use this as a huge dragnet for whistleblowers that approach WikiLeaks all over the world. And what is their aim? What do they want to? What is their lasting message to us? You don't even think about informing on the authorities, because we will crush you, and there'll be nobody out there that will stop us. And this is breaking the law with impunity.
Yeah.
And this is what makes it so disgusting to watch. No matter what arguments we present, and I always defer to Alexander Makiris in these affairs when it comes to legal things. I mean, everything that he has stated right there, they will not answer. They will not engage in dialogue. It is just brute force, and it's lies. All of it is just lies.
Yes.
And they're gleeful that they can get away with it because the public won't react. This is again, when a society lies to itself, a civilization dies, and this is exactly what we're watching.
Indeed so. Can I just add a few other quick points? I mean, Peter mentioned the newspapers, The Guardian, the New York Times, the Washington Post. They have all benefited from Julian Assange's work. They published it, they reproduced it, they worked with him. The Guardian shafted him. Luke Hardy, who is one of its chief journalists,
Don't even call him a journalist.
Well, I know. Whatever. I mean, one of their principal, if you like, spinmeisters or storytellers has published incredibly critical and abusive books about Julian Assange. He's published confidential information about WikiLeaks. And, of course, he has also peddled this fantasy about Julian Assange meeting Paul Manafort in the Ecuadorian Embassy, which fantasy, by the way, The Guardian still stands by. That story is still there. You can still find it on The Guardian. They've never retracted it. They've never admitted that it was wrong, even though everybody knows that it was wrong. So these journalists who benefited from Julian Assange, they all turned on him. A classic case of journalists acting no longer as proper journalists, but instead as gatekeepers for power. And that is a very disturbing development that puts, to my mind, in jeopardy the whole concept of the free press, as it's still called, in a democratic society, and puts a big question mark over whether that press is free at all. The second thing I wanted to say, now, just very briefly, Peter, is that I've never heard anybody say or allege that any information that WikiLeaks has published was either untrue or not in the public interest for the public to know. That, it seems to me, is confirmation of Assange's excellence as a journalist and of the excellence of the work that WikiLeaks does. I pass it over to you now, Peter.
Yeah, wonderfully said, and I'm glad you mentioned all of those things. You know, what is Julian Assange's real crime in the eyes of the authorities, in the eyes of power, is that he showed the world, and I remember talking to both of you over the years about this, is that, you know, we always had our suspicions about how things worked, and that what Julian Assange did was release documents that show we were absolutely right. We got a lot more detail than we ever would have dreamt of, but we're essentially right. It shows how corrupt power is here, and it's very interesting, isn't it? Trump is declared not to have been involved in any kind of collusion, but the same deep state, you know, they're tying up loose ends. Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange, and then shutting down WikiLeaks. Okay, they're tying up loose ends. It doesn't matter where you are on the political spectrum. It's about power. Okay, and the extra sin of Julian Assange and WikiLeaks is that, well, I mean, it wasn't collusion that got Donald Trump elected. It was probably, well, to some degree, James Comey fudging on Hillary Clinton's email scandal, and it was those what the emails that we're talking about, specifically Tony Podesta, was that WikiLeaks leaked it, and those in power want to punish the truth tellers, and this is again part of this really horrific saga that again so many people watch in silence, because when you watch in silence, you're culpable. You're part of this, okay? Yeah. And that's why we're speaking out against this atrocity right now.
All right. From Claudine Alexander, can Putin help him? This is a genuine question, not a troll.
No, I'm sure that's right, and I'm sure it is a genuine question, and I wish he could, but the reality is he can't. I mean, he has no influence over the British government, no influence over the United States government. And can I just say something? If Putin tried to help Assange, it would be an absolute disaster. They would take it as proof that Julian Assange really is the Russian agent that they say he is, which of course he's not. I mean, he never has been. Anybody who knows anything about the way WikiLeaks works and the way Julian Assange works know that he is a very difficult but extremely brave and very courageous person of great integrity and great honesty. So is Chelsea Manning, by the way. These people have shown extraordinary bravery in holding to their positions in the face of unbelievable pressure. But Putin can't help him. The Russians can't help him. The only people who can help him are the people of Great Britain and the United States. But will they? We shall see.
Peter,
just real quick here, and the Russian intelligence services would never get in bed with a whistleblowing organization at all. It is not their practice. They do not do that whatsoever. This connection between the Russian government and WikiLeaks is completely false. It's false on its face, though it's peddled over and over again. I'm sorry, the question,
right.
Please.
Yeah, the question, and I actually had this on my mind as well. Trump owes Assange big time from Farquad. Is that true? There is a certain truth to it.
I mean, there's a certain truth to it. I mean, it's almost kind of a poetic truth, you know. Donald Trump isn't going to lift a finger at all, because then again, because of this fake conspiracy that has been debunked over and over again. If Trump even tweets about it, oh, there's the collusion we've been looking for. See, this is what the deep state did. They created this narrative that really does freeze people, freeze them into silence. Because if you do the right thing, politically, it's wrong. If you do the right thing, it legally could create jeopardy. This is what conspiracy theories do. And this what this conspiracy theory has done is create fear. And when fear happens, particularly if you're in the public eye, you're in so-called journalism, you're just going to follow the script. You know, they're not. No one wants to lose their career defending Julian Assange. No way. I mean, these people, they're so vain. They're all narcissists that they wouldn't lift a finger to do the right thing. All right. And so Trump, poetically, yeah, he does owe Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, but only in poetry, I'm afraid.
He mentioned Alexander before you answered. He did mention WikiLeaks and Assange during the campaign in 2016. Trump, and you could say that Assange and WikiLeaks did provide Trump with quite a bit of ammo. It's hard to say if he would have come up with the lock her up phrase.
Tony Podesta, he provided the ammo.
Yeah,
okay? Because the message and the messenger are so different. That's what we need to keep separate here.
Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. Tony Podesta is using the word password as password for his emails. Absolutely. But it's hard to think of any lock her up kind of campaign phrase without WikiLeaks disseminating, Podesta's emails and stuff like that.
Sure.
Indeed. Can I make my own observation? Yes, I think Trump did to some extent benefit, but the people who benefited from what Julian Assange and WikiLeaks did in the 2016 election were first and foremost the people of the United States, because as a result of Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, they knew that Hillary Clinton and the DNC rigged the primary process, which resulted in Hillary Clinton becoming the Democratic Party's candidate for president. That was the scandal. Julian Assange and WikiLeaks exposed it. By doing so, they provided that very important information to the American people during the election, which of course the American people may have acted on. But you cannot simply displace this and say, well, Donald Trump benefited, because of course it was the American people who benefited, and it was Hillary Clinton and the Democrats who rightly suffered because of their own misdeeds. If they hadn't done those misdeeds, that situation would never have arisen at all. As I said, we should never lose sight of the fact that it was in the public interest, the American public's interest, that that information was made open and was provided to the American people during the election and not after, when it would have been too late.
A lot of excellent points, Peter. Also, on before you come, Peter, a lot of people asking, where's Australia in all of this? Julian Assange is, after all, an Australian citizen.
Exactly, and isn't it shameful the Australian government doesn't even speak out for one of its own? It has not at all. I mean, it kept itself on the margins, a footnote in all of this here. Again, then what's your citizenship worth if your country isn't going to help you? And particularly when there's a very, very solid legal case in his favor. All right. I mean, it's not black. There's no gray here. It's black and white. All right. His human and civil rights have been grossly violated on the face of it. And the Australian government is just gutless and shameful. It's because it is in the American orbit, and they're not going to upset that, and the Five Eyes and all of that. I mean, Julian Assange is a sacrificial lamb for them. They don't care. I mean, why in the world would the Australian government want to do the right thing, okay? It's not in its nature. It's not in the nature of any of these governments whatsoever. One thing I wanted to say, who else benefited from this? Who gleefully, every single drip of the Podesta emails, it was the media. They made a fortune off of it, okay? Look, they made a fortune making Donald Trump look like this buffoonish character, and sometimes he is. But during the campaign, in the Republican primary, they went to the bank on Donald Trump. They went to the bank, and then they went back to the bank with Russiagate here. So the media has played a culpable role in all of this. They've never been right about anything, but they do count their very, very big paychecks and their thick bank accounts, okay? Shame, shame, shame. Journalism today has the wrong motivations. There's only one motivation. It should be the truth. But that isn't part of the mix. It's not part of the equation. It hasn't been for a long time.
Not when you're Rachel Maddow and you're making $30,000 a day. That's for sure, Peter. Alexander, what does this say about Latin America and how much Latin America has changed? Whether you have Bolsonaro in Brazil, now you have the Ecuador president, who is a new president. He won an election, and I think right from the get-go when Moreno won, there was pretty much the hint that he was going to get rid of Assange. What do you make of this? And tie it into Venezuela.
Indeed, so well, indeed. I mean, the point about President Moreno, and by the way, his first name is Lenin Moreno. I mean, he started.
He flipped, yeah.
He started. He was elected as a leftist and a protege of the previous Ecuadorian president, Rafael Correa, who was, of course, the president who arranged for Assange to be granted asylum, in the Ecuadorian Embassy, and who was one of the standard bearers of the left. So Moreno was elected to that office as a leftist and as a continuer of Correa's policies. And of course, what he has actually done is he's reversed them entirely. So Correa is now in exile. The whole policies that Correa was associated with have been reversed. Moreno did an extraordinary speech recently, which he ranted on about socialists and leftists and people like that, ignoring the fact that he was supposedly one of them only a short time ago. And of course, he's taken this step with he's taking this step now with Julian Assange, which I think we could all see coming. But you're absolutely right. This is part of a trend. We've seen that there's been a systematic rollback, which began some years ago throughout Latin America. All those leftist regimes that came to power in the 1990s and 2000s in Brazil, in Argentina, in Ecuador, and elsewhere, they're proving very ephemeral. They are not able to survive, partly because, of course, the power of the United States in this region is enormous, but also because middle-class societies in this region are often very resistant to these leftist reforms that we have seen attempted in these places. So there we go. It's part of the trend. And to come back to Venezuela, which you asked me about, Lenin Moreno, the former disciple of Rafael Correa, elected as a leftist, is a strong supporter of the US regime change agenda in Venezuela. And he is now a founding member of this new regional grouping that the United States is going to try and set up in Latin America, bringing together the conservative right-wing governments in Brazil, Colombia, Peru, wherever, all of which are directed now at this regime change project in Venezuela. So that's what's happened. We've seen a total reversal. And I think I've always been skeptical about this leftist tide that people were talking about in Latin America. We see how shallow it really was.
Good point.
Well, and also very effective how the U.S. was able to continue its meddling here. Hey, I'm no socialist. Everybody knows that, okay? But there was clearly extraordinary meddling in the domestic affairs of all of these countries to make them fail. My position is whatever political system that the people agree to is fine with me, okay, even if it may be opposed to my ideological stripes. I first and foremost are against meddling, and this is what we've been seeing, and intensified, obviously, in Venezuela.
Yes.
Hey,
Yes.
Peter, what happens now? WikiLeaks has said it's a matter of hours, maybe a matter of days. How do you think this is going to go down if you had to take a stab at it?
Well, I suppose they're not going to avoid any kind of media spectacle. I mean, the thing is that you would think that the media would cover it as because it's a tragic day, but no, this is just another big ratings day. Okay, they got the son of a bitch. Okay, I mean, on American cable TV, people were openly calling for his assassination, for the murder. They were actively calling for murder.
Hillary Clinton did.
Yep, yeah. I mean, somebody said, she said, yeah, I should drone him, right? Okay. I can't remember what fool, just because they're in the intelligence community doesn't mean they're intelligent. Remember that, please, okay? That, that he should be assassinated.
Very true.
I suppose what they would want to do is that once he gets stepped out the door, they're going to want to put him in a van and is get away from it as far away as they can from the Ecuadorian embassy, probably debrief him, if I can use that term, and then look for the way that the U.S. is. It's all set up, I'm sure. The exchange and getting him on a flight and with an unmarked plane and I think that the British authorities they just want this over. They just want it over. They don't want to drag this out. They want to wash their hands of this and move on. Nothing happened. Nothing here. Move along. Okay. Yeah. So I mean, it seems to me that's that. They're not going to. I seriously doubt they're going to let him go on the front steps of the embassy and make his declaration to the world. I doubt that's going to happen. They're not going to deny him that. They're not going to afford him that speech here. They want all these things tied up quickly and with as little notoriety that makes the government look bad. And I have to say, considering how badly managed and run the British government is right now with all this Brexit nonsense, even I can't keep up with it. They really this is a nice diversion, because the country's really talking about its future here. Get this thorn out of their side, because I don't know how many millions of pounds the British government has wasted taxpayer money on this ridiculous charade.
Yes,
Alexander, legally, how does this thing? What's Assange's legal recourse? Does he have any, or are his human rights pretty much diminished, gone? And Goberwal also asks, what happens to WikiLeaks after this?
Yes, right. Okay. Let's take this one step at a time. Firstly, what happens to Assange? He's expelled from the embassy. He's arrested immediately on this arrest warrant for jumping bail. He's put in custody. I think the sentence is 6 months. But of course, as we very well know, during that period of time, there will be an extradition request from the United States, where it is widely known he is being prosecuted under the Espionage Act. The British will accede to that extradition request. There is a very tough extradition treaty between Britain and the United States, which basically says that the British will always hand over people that the United States requests. There will be attempts, I think, by some lawyers. In fact, I can make a pretty shrewd guess which lawyers to try to stop that. But I mean, there's no realistic possibility that any of those attempts will succeed. And as Peter correctly said, there'll be an unmarked plane, probably an unmarked car. He'll be taken to that plane. He'll be flown to the United States. And it's most unlikely we will hear very much of him. So that's the procedure which I think is going to be followed. And nobody should be under any realistic, have any realistic expectations that it's going to be affected in any way. To be honest, my own personal view is that even if some judge in the High Court, and there are some very, very good and decent judges in the High Court in London, were to issue a stay order saying you cannot, extradite Assange until the process has been completed, and there may be human rights implications in all of this, I am far from confident that the British authorities would comply with that order. I think they would simply move him across to the United States. That is the reality to it. I'm going to just add one thing, and I'm very glad Peter brought up the question of the British government, because I think that plays in some ways into the timing of this, because it is looking increasingly as if the British government is on the point of total disintegration. And I think that there is very great concern on the part of the deep states in London and the United States that if there is a general election or a new government, especially if it is headed by Jeremy Corbyn, then extraditing Julian Assange to the United States might become much more difficult. So this is being rushed out now in order to get it out of the way before that possibility arises. Now, what happens to WikiLeaks? I am going to make a prediction, which is that WikiLeaks will go on. I have met some of the people who work in WikiLeaks. I know them to be extremely tough and resourceful people. I mean, some of them are very young, but they are highly motivated. I think they will be angry, they will be upset, they will for a time be demoralized, but I predict that after they have got over all that anger and shock and demoralization, they will be even more motivated to continue with the work they do than they have been up to now. And I predict that WikiLeaks will continue and will survive and will continue as a thorn in the flesh of the establishments in the United States and in Britain until further steps are taken to finally and completely shut it down. And let us hope that by that point, political resistance in the so-called Western democracies, I say so-called because there is nothing democratic about these actions, but I hope the democratic feeling will stir and that we will never reach that point where action is taken against WikiLeaks to close it down. But I think WikiLeaks will survive, notwithstanding that Julian Assange himself is probably lost.
We will never see Julian Assange again, Peter?
Well, I think it's quite possible. I think it is quite possible because of the legal process that it will start once he gets on American soil. I mean, being charged with espionage will go into a special court, a secret court, and they're under no obligation. I mean, I certainly don't think they're going to let Julian Assange, give his side of the story in public. I don't think so. And they'll just say, well, this is because of the the kind of crime, this horrific crime of espionage. Okay, so they're going to say this is proprietary and in the national interest. You know, one of the things I was just thinking of when Alexander McCurris was talking about the potential future of WikiLeaks, isn't it really astounding how these tech companies and governments are slowly but surely getting people used to censorship? Okay, it's not me. I'm a mainstream guy. It doesn't affect me. It's always these fringe characters that they go after. No, the whole point is to control the narrative. All right, because if you don't stick up for these fringe characters, as much as you may disagree with them, then you're part of the problem. You're part of the problem of whittling away our speech rights. And they are rights. They're not privileges. They're rights. And you have to remember they're rights, not privileges that the state can adjudicate. And this is what this environment is telling people. And you have, and now I'll get political here. I mean, then you have these people on the left that want to shut down speech of people they don't like, and they're part of the problem as well. And the governments will take full advantage of it because governments don't like freedom of speech. They just don't, okay? You have to fight to keep your right. You have to continue to agitate for your right, or it'll just be taken away from you because people that think differently are annoying and a nuisance, and they might change things around them. And the powers that be are very wedded to the status quo. And Julian Assange and WikiLeaks were always a huge thorn in the side of people that believe in the status quo because it's in their own self-interest.
Peter, I haven't heard Rachel Maddow, Chris Hayes, Hannity, whether it's MSNBC, CNN, or Fox News. I haven't heard anyone stand up for Julian Assange.
Well, in all fairness, Sean Hannity did, but for very different reasons.
Well, he interviewed him, but he turned on him very quick.
Hannity only did it to protect Trump. He didn't do it for freedom of speech, even though every single night he says he's for freedom of speech. Every single night. But he's never spoken up for the freedom of speech of Julian Assange. I stand corrected. You're right.
Alexander from Michael Julian would like to know, Alex, under international law, can you reverse asylum once it is granted? I don't think so.
Well, that's a very, very good question.
It can be revoked. It can be revoked under certain circumstances.
Yeah. I mean, asylum always comes with conditions. And if you breach those conditions, it can be revoked. But of course, in this particular case, Moreno is claiming that Assange has breached those conditions, and I don't see that he has, not in any real way. I mean, we shouldn't make the mistake of accepting these stories about Assange having done inappropriate things as the true reason why he's being deported. I mean, can I just say, I mean, for me, the response to Chelsea Manning's initial prosecution and mistreatment, the complete silence by people like, say, Amnesty International, which used to be, once upon a time, I can remember when that was a good organization, and the media, that profoundly shocked me. But it has been far greater, my shock was far greater when she was arrested and sent to prison, apparently indefinitely, all over again, because she refuses to give evidence against Assange. I mean, I think that is monstrous. I think that is barbaric. And I find it incredible that the silence which has descended right across the media and the political worlds in the face of this kind of behavior. And I'm afraid that silence extends to Assange and to WikiLeaks also. And I'm going to take one issue with Peter on one thing. I don't consider Assange or WikiLeaks or Chelsea Manning to they be the true mainstream because they are doing the proper work of journalists.
We're agreeing, but in different ways. Okay, what I'm saying is the powers that be deem them as marginal. Okay,
Absolutely.
that's what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
Also, I'm going to go out on the limb right here, but I don't think any asylum application can forbid freedom of speech. I don't think that's
of course not
possible.
That's absolutely correct. I mean that is totally correct. That is infringing, prohibiting freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is supposed to be a human right. Right. It's a human right in the United States under the First Amendment. It is a human right in Europe under Article 10 of the European Convention of Human Rights, of which Britain is a signatory. So you cannot predicate a right. grant of asylum on a abolition of someone's fundamental human rights in that way. It can't be done. Of course, it has been done in this case, because that's basically what Moreno is saying.
All right, guys, we're 40 minutes in. Let's try to end this on a positive note. Is there a way that all of this can boomerang back and hit the intelligence agencies, the deep state, the mainstream media? Can this blow back in their face what they're about to do to Assange? Can you guys think of any ways that this can boomerang back and really hit them hard?
Well, I mean, what we need to do is have done, and we know that Lindsey Graham is in the Senate is talking about this. He wants to bring up all of these intelligence officials. I'm thinking about in the CIA and FBI and Main Justice, and see how they concocted all of this. Remember, the false predicate of all this Russiagate is WikiLeaks. Okay, that's what they say started it. All right, or was an integral part of it here. And we need to find out what they believed, what they said publicly, and what we know, what can be proven. I mean, when you get all these people lined up and you depose them and you start questioning them, if they're all telling the truth, they're going to say the same story. But I don't think that's going to happen. Okay, we have to find out who started all of this, because Russiagate was one of their goals was to go after Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. Okay, that was part of the mosaic right here, and they wanted to take as many people down that opposed them and actually spoke truth to power. So I think that it is quite possible we could find out all the involvement of all of these people in this witch hunt of Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. But you have to remember it was kind of part of the fabric of Russiagate. And I hope, because I think for the vast majority of people, they are glad that this whole ridiculous hoax is over with. But I hope that there's still enough interest out there to see how WikiLeaks was used as a cudgel in this hoax. Okay, we need to find that out. We should find it out.
Alexander.
Yes, I'll tell you what I think. I mean, I think we must understand that what we are looking at with this, as I said, deportation of Assange to America, it may be a demonstration of power, but it is also a confession of weakness. A strong country, strong and confident in its democratic institutions, does not need to behave in this way. In the 1970s, all sorts of horror stories came out in the United States about what had happened in the 1950s and 1960s with the CIA and with the FBI and with the Pentagon Papers. And in those days, the legal system of the United States worked properly. The whistleblowers at that time were protected. All this information was published and circulated in the media.
The Church Commission.
And there was the Church Commission in the United States. At that time, the United States was strong, and it felt itself to be strong. That it is behaving in this way now is a sign that it no longer feels strong in that way, that it feels weak. And by these actions, by these demonstrations of power, what it is doing is it is, first of all, undermining even further those democratic principles and institutions which underpinned the United States. But it is also creating the conditions where one day all those institutions are going to be properly challenged. And can I point out to one important thing, which I've already said? When you have people like Assange and Chelsea Manning, especially for me, Chelsea Manning, I have to say, behaving with this extraordinary courage and standing up and withstanding power in that kind of a way, that is always something that should give one hope. And because if people like that can do it when they are so vulnerable, think what will happen when other people who are more powerful, more self-confident, in a stronger position, start to push back as well. And sooner or later, that will happen, because this is not a sustainable thing.
Well, Alexander Christopher, wanted to end on a positive note. I'm sorry, I'm going to pour cold water on this party. Alexander Mikiris is absolutely right about the revelations of the 60s and 50s, 60s, and 70s that culminated in the Church Commission. But there's one important element there that was in play that isn't in play right now. The media was genuinely interested.
Yes.
And this is, see, what we have now, we have the worst of all possible worlds. We have the deep state in the media with social, the tech companies. They're all in a bewitched marriage. They're all on the same side, and they're all on the same side against the truth. That's it's very pessimistic. Okay,
well,
because we had people that dug deep, and the Pentagon Papers is the best example. I mean, they just recently made that stupid film called The Post. How in the world could you make that film in the middle of Russiagate? I mean, I was just I didn't watch it because I just thought this is a farce. Okay, the Washington Post wants to pat itself on the back. What have you been doing, Washington Post, from the weapons of mass destruction to the present? You ought to be ashamed of yourself. Yes. Ashamed.
Yes.
And then Hollywood pats you on the back. Shameful.
Yes. Well, can I just quickly, I mean, because I am going to end it on a note of hope. What you say, Pete, is absolutely true. But historic experience, and this is universal, is that when you have this kind of tight control of the narrative, and when that narrative increasingly deviates from the truth as people experience it in their everyday lives, that narrative crumbles, and the credibility of those who are promoting that narrative crumbles also. We've just had a parliamentary by-election in Britain. It happened yesterday in a part of Wales which voted overwhelmingly to leave the European Union. And of course, the media here is overwhelmingly Remain. And so, of course, are all the major political parties, including, dare I say it now, has become increasingly obvious, the leadership of the Conservative Party. And what everybody's reporting about that parliamentary by-election is that the candidates of all the parties came in for unbelievable abuse on people's doorsteps, and the turnout was extremely low, and people were very, very angry, and both of the two big parties, both Labour and Conservative, lost ground. Now, that, to me, that's obviously an issue about Brexit, but to me, that ties in with what's happening with Assange. If you try and close down alternative voices, if you try to close down alternative options, you are simply creating, in the end, a crisis for yourself. And when Alex Christoforou spoke to us about a backlash, be absolutely sure that backlash will come. I don't know how long it will be. We're going to have a tough time until it happens, but happen one day it will.
Well, I'm sorry, but, systems do collapse, all right? I was in communist Eastern Europe, 1989. I watched it collapse. And then 1991, the Soviet Union. So, I mean, a society that continues to be lied to and knows that they're being lied to, you can get a very dangerous critical mass. So, I think maybe that's kind of a moderate ending to our conversation here. What I'm just saying, I agree with you. The more you lie to the people, and you have professional liars do it for you, the media, the better chance the greater chance you're going to create a crisis, a real meaningful crisis of confidence in every institution. Forget the politicians.
Well, exactly. Exactly.
All right. From Free Exaria, hey guys, this is from Sky News. Ecuador's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Jose Valencia, said the claims were unfounded.
Ah.
We'll be following this story.
Well, would you believe do you believe the Ecuadorians or do you believe WikiLeaks? I think that's that's the crux of it all. Who do you believe? I believe WikiLeaks. I don't believe the Ecuadorians.
Right. Yeah, well, can I just say something else? Can I just say something else, Peter? People like us, people like WikiLeaks, people like the people protesting outside the embassy, may just have won a big victory because we cannot discount the possibility that it was those protests, possibly in Ecuador as well, that have managed to turn this decision round, it seems, at the very last moment. Because I have no doubt that those reports which were coming out yesterday were true. Remember, WikiLeaks itself was publishing them. And WikiLeaks, if it is nothing else, it is a very reliable source of news.
And I have a direct connection. There is someone that works for WikiLeaks residing in Russia right now, and she is I was about to check my email, but she keeps me up to date on everything that's going on. I believe them. I don't believe the Ecuadorians.
Right.
Indeed. There you go.
Well, we will definitely be following this story and covering it. A couple more super chats. American Rebel, thank you for covering this. Michael Furcas, thank you for your super chat as well. Gavin B, great channel. Keep up the great work. And Tricky Vicky, there are no charges that can be made on part of the U.S. against Julian Assange, except the charge of practicing honest journalism. That's criminal.
Very true. Very true. Thank you for saying that.
That's absolutely true. All right, guys, so we'll end this live chat here. Yes, Alexander.
And let's not take out the champagne just yet. But as I said, it may be that we've had a pushback. All the indications last night were bad. It may be that, as I said, all these protests...
Or maybe they just want the protesters to go and they're going to do it in the middle of the night.
Well, of course, that may also be true. That may also be true.
All right,
but let's wait and see. Let's wait and see.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on this live chat. Hope you have a great day. Everyone take care. Thank you, Peter Lavelle. Thank you, Alexander McCurse.